You've been told a lie so often you stopped questioning it. That studying means stuffing facts into your head, repeating them until you can spit them back out on command. You spend hours highlighting, rereading, memorizing. You think, if I can repeat it, I must understand it. But here's the truth. You're building a sandcastle at the edge of the ocean. It looks solid, impressive, but the first wave, an unexpected question, a twist on a problem, a real-life application, washes it away. All that time, and you're left with nothing but wet sand and frustration. You know the feeling. You walk out of an exam room and your mind is a blank slate. Or worse, you pass the test, but weeks later, you can't explain any of it. You start to believe you're not smart enough. Maybe studying just isn't for you. This is the myth that poisons minds. That learning is about collecting facts, hoarding information, passing tests. That if you fail, the problem is you, not the method. But let's be brutally honest. Our education system rewards the appearance of knowledge, not the substance. It trains you to be a parrot, not a thinker. You become excellent at recognizing patterns, regurgitating definitions, but clueless when you need to build or invent. Imagine trying to repair a car by memorizing the names of every part, but never understanding how the engine works. When the car breaks down, all your labels are useless. That's how most people approach learning, naming, not knowing. This isn't just inefficient, it's a trap. It breeds imposter syndrome, anxiety, and a cycle of shallow effort. You're running on a treadmill, sweating, but going nowhere. You're told to work harder, to memorize more, to double down on the same broken process. No one tells you to step off the treadmill and look at the machinery itself. Here's the punchline. It's not your fault. You were never taught how to actually understand. You were taught how to pass. There's a chasm between the two, and most never cross it. The system is designed to reward short-term recall, not long-term mastery. It's like being handed a map with only street names, but no sense of direction, no landmarks, no understanding of the terrain. And so you keep collecting names, facts, formulas, thinking you're getting smarter. But when you're asked to solve a real problem, to connect the dots, you freeze. The illusion shatters. You realize you've been playing a game with the wrong rules. But here's the twist. The real world doesn't care how many facts you can recite. It cares if you can use them, bend them, break them apart, and build something new. That's the difference between memorizing a recipe and actually cooking a meal. One is imitation, the other is creation. You've been sold the myth that learning is about storage, not transformation. That your mind is a warehouse, not a workshop. But deep down, you know this isn't working. You crave understanding, not just recognition. You want to see the gears turning, not just the labels on the box. If you want to be part of the minority who studies to understand, not just to pass, subscribe now. The next step is to see how Feynman shattered this illusion forever. Feynman never accepted the world as it was handed to him. He saw through the surface, like stripping the paint off a machine to reveal the gears inside. When he started at Princeton, he noticed something strange. Students memorized solutions but couldn't solve new problems. They knew the names, the formulas, the steps, yet when the context shifted, they froze. Why? Because they were reciting, not understanding. Picture this. You're given a toolbox, beautifully labeled, everything in its place. But when you need to fix a real engine, the labels vanish, and you realize you never learned how the tools actually work. Feynman refused to play that game. He didn't just name tools. He dismantled them, rebuilt them, made them his own. He wanted to know what made the system tick, not just what it was called. Here's the moment that changed his trajectory forever. During a physics lecture, the professor asked a question about energy conservation. Every student could write the equation. No one could explain in plain words what it meant for a bouncing ball. Feynman called it out. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. He started carrying a notebook. Each new concept he'd break down until he could explain it to a child. No jargon, no shortcuts. He hunted for gaps, those moments of confusion most people gloss over. Instead of hiding them, he shined a spotlight. That's how he built real knowledge, by exposing ignorance, not masking it. But here's the error everyone else makes. They fear looking foolish. They cling to the comfort of recognition. I know this formula. I remember that law. Feynman did the opposite. He celebrated ignorance as the starting point for learning. The courage to say, I don't know, became his superpower. Think about that. The world rewards knowing answers. Feynman rewired his brain to crave understanding. He measured success not by what he could recite, but by what he could truly explain. That's the Feynman lens: relentless honesty, radical simplicity, and zero tolerance for pretense. But let's go deeper. Imagine you're in a room full of people nodding along to a lecture. The speaker draws a complex diagram, rattles off terminology, and everyone pretends to follow. Feynman would stop the room. He'd ask, "What does this actually mean? Can you show me with your hands? Can you draw it in the sand?" He forced clarity by refusing to move on until the fog lifted. That's why he was called the Great Explainer. Not because he knew more, but because he demanded to see the machinery behind the words. His notebooks became laboratories for thought. He'd write, erase, sketch, and question until the idea was stripped to its skeleton. If something didn't make sense, he'd chase it relentlessly, sometimes for days. He didn't care if it made him look slow. He cared about seeing the truth, not just passing the test. Here's the twist. This approach isn't just for physics. It's a way of seeing the world. Feynman's lens is about refusing to accept the illusion of knowledge. It's about asking, always, do I really get this, or am I just repeating what I've heard? That's the difference between the crowd and the outlier. That's the difference between memorizing and understanding. And that's the mindset that can change everything you learn from now on. But here's the error everyone makes. You treat your brain like a hard drive, not a living, changing organism. You stack facts, hoping quantity becomes quality. It never does. Your brain isn't built to store lines of code. It's wired to recognize patterns, test hypotheses, and adapt to novelty. Repetition without understanding is like pouring buckets of water onto a stone. Most of it runs off, leaving the surface barely damp. Picture this: a conveyor belt in a factory, boxes sliding past, each one labeled with a fancy name. The workers never open the boxes. They just shuffle, stamp, and send them on. That's rote memorization. You can recite the labels, but you have no idea what's inside. Schools, textbooks, and even most online courses push you to recite, repackage, and regurgitate. The result? You can name the box, but you're clueless about its contents. Now let's look inside your brain. When you memorize, you activate a shallow circuit. It's like tracing your finger over the surface of a table, familiar but superficial. You light up your short-term memory, but you don't build strong neural connections. The information sits on the surface, ready to be wiped away by stress, distraction, or time. Understanding, on the other hand, is like carving deep grooves into wood. It forces you to form links, challenge old circuits, and create new pathways. The brain thrives on struggle. When you break a concept down, wrestle with what doesn't make sense, and rebuild it from the ground up, your neurons rewire. That's plasticity in action. Here's the catch. Your brain rewards illusion. It loves the feeling of fluency, reading notes, recognizing terms, thinking, I know this. But recognition is not recall, and recall is not understanding. You think you've learned because the material looks familiar. But put the book away, ask a question out loud, and you realize the foundation is sand. The illusion is comforting, but it's a trap. You're mistaking the shadow for the substance. Feynman called this the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Biology agrees. To learn deeply, you must force your mind past comfort. You must open the box, handle what's inside, and question every piece. That's when real learning happens, when you're uncomfortable, when you're confused, when you're forced to connect the dots yourself. Traditional study methods betray you. They promise learning but deliver only the echo of learning. They give you the map but never let you walk the terrain. If you want real change, you need to break the surface and dig. You need to get your hands dirty, to struggle, to fail, and to rebuild. That's how your brain grows. That's how understanding is forged. And that's the only way to escape the cycle of forgetting and frustration that plagues everyone who studies the old way. Here's the principle that changes everything. Knowing the name of something is not the same as knowing the thing itself. Feynman hammered this into his own mind and into anyone who'd listen. He called out the difference between reciting a label and grasping the machinery behind it. Picture a child pointing to a bird and proudly announcing, "That's a sparrow." But ask what makes a sparrow? Silence. Naming is easy. Understanding is rare. Your brain is wired to prefer shortcuts. It clings to labels because they're fast, clear, and safe. But labels are just handles. They don't unlock the box. Real learning is the act of prying the box open, peering inside, and poking at the gears. Feynman called this the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. It's the difference between recognizing the shape of a key and actually turning it in the lock. Here's the epiphany. Every subject, from physics to philosophy, is a black box. School teaches you to memorize what's written on the outside. But the inside, the messy, moving parts, are where understanding lives. When you rip off the label and demand to see the mechanism, you force your brain to build bridges, not just recall roads. Most people stop at the surface. They collect facts, stack up definitions, and hope these will save them. But facts are like single bricks. Without mortar, the connections, the reasons, the inner logic, they collapse under the slightest pressure. Feynman's genius wasn't in knowing more bricks. It was in seeing how they fit together. But here's the mistake everyone makes. You think you understand because you can repeat the words. But repetition is not comprehension. To learn like Feynman, you must dig for what's underneath. You must explain things so simply that a 5-year-old could understand. If you can't do this, you don't really know it. This is the principle, the core mechanism that separates real learners from pretenders. Imagine you're handed a sealed box with a button on top. You press the button and a light flashes. Most people are satisfied. Press button, light flashes. Got it. But Feynman would ask, what's inside? Why does the light flash? What connects the button to the bulb? He'd take the box apart, trace the wires, and maybe even break it in the process. That's the price of real understanding. Risking confusion, risking failure, but gaining insight you can rebuild from scratch. This principle is brutal in its honesty. It exposes the gaps you'd rather ignore. It forces you to admit, I don't know. But that's the moment your brain wakes up. That's when learning actually begins. Every time you hit a wall, every time you can't explain something in your own words, you've found the edge of your knowledge. Feynman didn't fear these edges, he hunted them. He knew that only by confronting ignorance could he push it back, inch by inch. So, the next time you think you've learned something, test it. Strip away the jargon. Try to teach it to a child, or to yourself in the simplest language possible. If you stumble, don't hide it, celebrate it. That's your map to deeper understanding. That's the Feynman principle in action. Here's how you turn this principle into a living habit. Grab a sheet of paper, blank, no lines, no prompts. Write the concept you're trying to master at the top. Now explain it in your own words as if you're teaching someone who knows nothing about it. No shortcuts, no technical terms. Draw, sketch, use stick figures. If your explanation breaks down, mark that spot. That's a leak in your understanding. Go back to your source. Patch the leak, not by copying, but by rebuilding the idea until it flows naturally from your mind. Imagine you're assembling a bicycle from scratch, but you've never seen one before. You follow a manual step by step, but then the manual disappears. Could you rebuild the bike? Or would you stare at a pile of metal, stuck? That's the difference between memorization and understanding. When you truly get it, you could build that bike in the dark with your hands tied behind your back just by feeling the shape of each part in your mind. This is the Feynman technique in practice. Identify the concept, teach it simply, find the gaps, return, rebuild, repeat. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, but it's unbreakable. Every time you genuinely teach something, even to yourself, you deepen the neural grooves that make real learning possible. But here's the error most people make. They stop at the first pass. They write a summary, feel smart, and move on. Feynman never did that. He circled back, questioned every assumption, stress-tested each connection. He poked holes until there were none left. That's why his knowledge was bomb-proof. You're not looking for the feeling of knowing. You're looking for the pressure points, the places where your understanding bends or breaks under scrutiny. That's where growth happens. Most avoid that discomfort. But that's exactly where you need to live if you want mastery. Let's get even more concrete. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Pick a topic you think you know. Explain it out loud as if you're on stage and your audience is a room full of curious children. If you get stuck, don't gloss over it. Write down the exact question that tripped you up. That question is gold. It's the key to unlocking the next layer of depth. Now, go back to your resources. Don't just reread, reconstruct. Ask, why does this work this way? What would happen if it didn't? Can I connect this idea to something I already understand? The more connections you build, the stronger your mental model becomes. You're not stacking facts, you're weaving a net that can catch new ideas as they come. Here's another Feynman move. Use analogies. If you can compare a quantum particle to a bouncing ball or a complex equation to a recipe, you're forcing your brain to translate abstract ideas into concrete images. That's not dumbing it down, that's making it real. Feynman once said, if you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. So the next time you study, don't just highlight and recite. Build, break, rebuild. Teach, question, connect. That's the cycle. That's how you turn knowledge into something you own, not just something you rent for the next exam. But here's the trap that almost everyone walks into. Your mind resists the real work. It whispers, you already know this, move on. That's not intelligence. It's intellectual laziness disguised as confidence. Feynman saw this all the time, even among Nobel laureates. They hid behind jargon, mistaking memorized words for true understanding. Picture a rickety bridge made of loose planks. You run across, eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the gaps. You reach the other side, until someone asks you to explain how the bridge stands. Suddenly, you realize you don't know which plank holds and which will snap. That's the illusion most learners live in. Moving fast, never checking the structure beneath their steps. Your ego plays a role here. It hates the feeling of not knowing. It prefers the comfort of surface-level mastery. It tells you that pausing to question, to admit gaps, is a sign of weakness. But Feynman called this fooling yourself. And, in his words, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. The other silent enemy, the craving for speed. You want shortcuts, you crave quick wins, fast progress. But the brain doesn't rewire at the pace of your impatience. Learning isn't a sprint, it's engineering. Neurons need friction, error, and time to build new circuits. Skipping these steps is like building a house on sand. One shake and everything collapses. Here's the epiphany. Real learning feels uncomfortable. It's not the smooth path. It's the one where you trip, fix, and trip again. If you never feel that discomfort, you're not really learning. You're just rehearsing illusions. But here's another layer, social pressure. Most people around you are satisfied with shallow learning. They reward speed, grades, and the appearance of competence. When you slow down to question, to dig deeper, you might feel out of place. You might even face ridicule. Feynman himself was seen as odd for constantly asking dumb questions. But that's exactly why he understood what others only pretended to. There's also the trap of routine. You get comfortable with your study rituals, highlighting, rereading, copying notes. These actions feel productive, but they're just busy work. They give you the illusion of progress without the substance. Feynman avoided routines that dulled his curiosity. He sought novelty, challenge, and the discomfort of not knowing. And then there's the fear of failure. Every time you confront a gap in your understanding, you risk feeling stupid. But Feynman embraced this. He saw every moment of confusion as a signpost. Here's where I can grow. Most people run from this feeling. They patch over it with memorization or move on quickly. But if you want to think like Feynman, you have to do the opposite. You have to stop, stare into the gap, and refuse to move on until you've built a solid plank. So the real obstacle isn't lack of intelligence or time. It's the mental habits you've built to protect your ego and avoid discomfort. The only way through is radical honesty. Admit what you don't know, seek out your blind spots, and treat confusion as a compass, not a curse. If you want to escape these traps, you need to welcome confusion. You need to hunt for what you don't know, not hide from it. That's the Feynman way. It's painful for your ego, but liberating for your mind. Here's the epiphany. This isn't just about acing exams or memorizing trivia. This is about rewiring how you interact with every problem in life. Feynman didn't reserve his approach for quantum physics. He applied it to everything, fixing radios as a kid, cracking safes at Los Alamos, even learning languages. Picture your brain as a workshop, not a warehouse. Most people just stack boxes, facts, formulas, definitions, until the space is crammed and useless. Feynman cleared the floor, took every tool apart, and rebuilt them to fit new tasks. That's why he could improvise solutions where others stalled. He didn't just know things, he understood how things worked, and that made all the difference. Now, imagine applying this to your own world. You stop stuffing your mind with things you barely understand. Instead, you start asking, why does this work? What am I missing? What piece doesn't fit? Suddenly, every subject, math, history, coding, even relationships, becomes a puzzle you're equipped to solve, not a list you're doomed to memorize. You're not just learning for a test, you're learning for life. Here's the mistake everyone makes. They think learning is a silo, disconnected from daily life. But the same mental muscles you use to break down a physics concept are the ones that help you fix a broken process at work, negotiate with a stubborn client, or see through a political illusion. Feynman called it the joy of figuring things out, and it's addictive. Once you taste it, rote learning feels like eating cardboard. It's bland, unsatisfying, and leaves you hungry for something real. But here's the twist. This approach doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you more adaptable. The world is changing faster than ever. Facts expire, techniques become obsolete. But the ability to deconstruct, reconstruct, and question, that's timeless. It's the difference between being replaced by a machine and being the person who invents the next one. You'll notice something else. As you build the habit of hunting for gaps and rebuilding understanding, your confidence grows. Not arrogance, the humility to say, I don't know yet. That's the true power. You become the rare person who's comfortable with ambiguity, who can face the unknown and say, let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes. You stop fearing mistakes because every error is a clue, not a condemnation. This is bigger than grades. It's about becoming an adaptive thinker in a world that punishes rigidity. It's about shaping your mind into a toolkit, not a museum. That's the Feynman shift. It's the difference between surviving and thriving, between memorizing the map and actually exploring the territory. And once you start, you'll never want to go back. You've now seen the gears beneath the illusion. So here's your new model. Stop worshiping the textbook, start interrogating it. Every fact you meet, break it open, make it bleed meaning. If you can't explain a concept to a curious child, you don't own it. That's not just Feynman's rule, it's nature's. Picture your brain as a workshop, not a vault. Tools hang on the wall. Each concept must earn its place by being useful, tested, and rebuilt as needed. Useless knowledge rusts. Only what you shape with your own hands survives. Imagine a mechanic who collects parts but never builds an engine. That's the fate of those who memorize without understanding. Here's the synthesis. Learning isn't hoarding, it's demolition and reconstruction. You tear down what you think you know, inspect every piece, then rebuild, stronger, simpler, yours. That's how you bulletproof understanding. That's how Feynman solved the Challenger disaster when experts froze. He refused to let jargon shield ignorance. He demanded clarity until the mechanism was naked. You don't need a genius IQ for that. You need humility, relentless curiosity, and the courage to look dumb before you become smart. The world rewards the few who ask, "What do I really understand?" and refuse to hide behind memorized answers. Most people never do this. They fear the embarrassment of not knowing. But Feynman called that the first step to real knowledge, admitting what you don't know. Here's the practical challenge. For the next topic you study, explain it to someone who knows nothing. Notice where you stumble, where your words tangle. That's your edge, the place to grow. Every time you catch yourself reciting, not reasoning, stop. Dig deeper. Ask yourself, do I really get this, or am I just parroting? And remember, the world is built by those who dare to question, not those who settle for answers. The difference between memorizing and mastering is the difference between tracing a map and walking the terrain. You'll get lost if you don't feel the ground under your feet. So here's your invitation. Don't just watch this video, use it as a lever. For every subject, every problem, every conversation, ask yourself, could I teach this to a child? Could I draw it on a napkin? If not, you haven't reached the core yet. Keep digging. If this video turned a single gear in your mind, imagine what happens when the whole machine shifts. Subscribe for the next mind shift, because from now on, you don't just learn, you transform. And the world belongs to those who do.